All right, hi everybody, welcome back. This is ACM SIGGRAPH, and today is April 28th, 2021, and tonight we have a web design workshop with our friends over at UXUI Association. So let us begin. So welcome to today's workshop. And what we'll be covering today is current club activities for both ACM and UXUI. We'll also then begin with the workshop that discusses the importance of having a website, what companies are looking for, basic design vocabulary, portfolio language, website building options, and short website reviews. Before getting into the workshop, we have some announcements. So obviously today's event is the collaboration with UXUI Association. Monday, May 3rd, we're going to have a panel talk. So we're going to bring in two guests, Vina Kong and Nancy Solomon. Vina, she's going to talk about what's like being a production assistant in the animation industry. And Nancy's going to talk about what's like building a career in AR and VR. And then our last event of the semester is going to be on Wednesday, May 12th. And so basically we're going to have a game night. It's something very fun, very chill, where we just hang out before the rush of finals begin. And then the last day of instruction for classes is May 17th. So usually that's when your last day of classes end. And then after that, you'll kind of have dead week, dead day, and then you get into finals. Finals information can be found at this link, which I will post in the chat later. And then final schedule is kind of out. So like if you didn't get the email, they said that the final schedule was going to be out, but then they're still making adjustments to times and dates. So really the final schedule isn't going to be out until May 6th. So that's when you can look at like the final times and dates. So that way you can plan accordingly your fall 21 schedule. And with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to our friends at UX and UI to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie, and if you don't know about the UXUI Association, we're a new student organization that was formed this year. We've already grown to over 300 members in our Discord. We have 3 committees, our social media committee, our web development committee, and our content committee. And we are going to be holding officer elections in May. We currently have, I believe, 10 officer positions open. So if you're interested in learning more about us and you're not already part of our Discord or following us on social media, I'm going to share in the chat right now. Here is a link. Oh, nice. There's a link to our Discord and also a link to all of our social medias as well. You can go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to hand it over to Erin, who's going to share.
Hi, everybody. 1 second, sorry. Okay, so why have your own website? Oops. First of all, having your own website shows recruiters that you're serious about what you want to be doing and serious about managing your image. So the image of your own website is tied to your future employer's website through association. So you want to make sure that your image is professional, but also personal to make that connection with recruiters. Secondly, you can make yourself stand out when applying for jobs if you have your own website. So keeping an updated portfolio with your best work and a short bio and a contact form will instantly increase your visibility. Creative agencies, big companies, and established businesses need to be able to easily find you, identify your skill level, and reach out if they're interested in hiring you. And this should all happen in one place, which would be your website. And then lastly, your own website is a place to express yourself through your projects and also through your style of design, because your website in itself is a design aspect because you designed it. So that's one of the greatest things about having your own website, is just the personalization of it. Okay. So what are companies and recruiters looking for? First of all, they want you to want the job. So if you are applying for a job and they say, "Why do you want this?" and you pause and then go, I just really need money," that's not really gonna make you look super appealing for them. And so considering the job that you want will help you in the competitive job searching market, because you'll be more passionate about it. And so essentially, this is a pitch, right? Your website is a pitch about what you can do and what you like to do. And so recruiters and companies will see that through your website. Secondly, you want to personalize your website, as I was talking about before. One of the best pieces of advice that I received from a design professor was to make my portfolio reflect, excuse me, reflect what I want to do and who I am. So my website is personalized to have my favorite color, which is orange. And I have a personal project on there that I kind of made up. No client paid me to do it, but it shows what I would like to do further along in my career if I could pick a dream industry to do graphic design in. So that personal project that I have on there is just for myself, but it shows my creative side and it shows what I can do. And then lastly, experiment with your website like you would with a drawing. So tell a story through your designs with the design process. So this would be sketching, editing, and repeating. And by the end, you should feel a connection to this website, and you'll know that you're putting out the best professional and creative work that you can into the virtual world.
And that's kind of what we're doing as part of our startup as Legal AI, is to help people find lawyers in the
Okay. So the important elements of a design portfolio, Katie will go into more of this a little later on, but just quickly, I want to emphasize that your portfolio should only have your best work. So don't put in everything you've ever done because everyone's going to have some bad projects. And so it's up to you and asking friends, colleagues for their input. And you should really only choose, some people will say only choose like 4 to 6 of your best work for your portfolio. And then including your design process is important so that recruiters can see the way that your brain thinks. Personal branding, this is how you stand out to hiring managers and showcase your style. This would be create a logo for yourself and a color palette, and use typefaces that are consistent and reflect your style. Fourth, mock-ups. So as students, obviously a lot of our projects, excuse me, a lot of our projects never fully develop into the real thing. So the best way to bring them to life is through using mock-ups. And so this is what your design looks like in 3D. As you can see on this picture here, this designer put their work onto these iPhone mock-ups, and it just looks so clean and nice and beautiful. And I feel like that's the best way to really show that your work is the real deal. And then lastly, or second to last, an about page. People like to know who they're working with. They want to know if you're the type of person they could be working with. So that's important. And then also a call to action, which is, what do you want people to get out of joining your website? Sorry, my voice is like disappearing as we speak, but call to action is, do you want to turn your website visitors into clients, or are you trying to sell them something? This call to action should be visible on pretty much every page, because you don't want to miss that moment when your visitor decides that they want to become a client. Okay, moving on to some basic design vocabulary. We have, so in the UXUI Association, a big thing that we focus on is the difference between UX and UI, and also how they work together. So user experience is the UX side, and this includes psychology and strategy and research and all of the disciplines that study the effect of design on the ease of use and level of satisfaction with a product, site, or system. So a lot of our members in the UXUI Association, the people who are more interested in UX, are often psychology majors. And then with UI, a lot of the people who are more interested in UI come from design backgrounds. So this is, UI is what the user sees. It can be a set of commands or menus. It's also the space where interactions between the humans and the machines or the technology occurs. So this is, visual design, motion design, prototyping, typography, all of those design aspects. So then moving forward to some, oh. Okay, there we go. Two more pieces of vocabulary that are important to know in the UX UI world is user flow and user journey. Katie will talk about these later as well, specifically for portfolios, but just as a general overall term, the user flow is the steps that a user takes to accomplish a task. So this task is the call to action that I was talking about on the previous slide. So it's all the steps that somebody has to go through to accomplish this task. And so you want to write them all out, figure out the journey that your user will go through, and this will help you get started on your design. The user journey is the customer journey, so it includes this user flow, but it also includes external factors that bring people to your site, what they do after they leave, and that is all part of the whole experience of getting a client. Okay, and then the last bit of vocabulary for you guys, we have sketching, wireframes, mockups, and responsive web design. So sketching, obviously, everyone knows what sketching is, but in the UX UI world, it's just a super simple sketch of what do you see in your mind when you think of what you want your website to look like. So sometimes you can get lost if you just go right to the computer and start designing. And so that's why it's important to have a sketchbook or a notebook just to quickly sketch down your ideas and remind yourself later. And then before you get to high fidelity wireframes, you want to do low fidelity wireframes. So this low fidelity is like simple squares and simple line work that shows boxes and where text will go, titles, pictures, all the above. And then high fidelity is more built out. And so this is what I have, more high fidelity wireframes on my own personal portfolio. But moving on from wireframes, you can prototype and move into mockups. Another aspect of mockups and wireframes is it's important that your portfolio and your website is responsive. So this means that if you say you send an email to a hiring manager, and in that email has a link to your website, if they're on their phone and they open up your website on there, it has to look as beautiful on your phone as it would on the computer. If they're on a tablet and they open up your website on their iPad, you need to make sure that your website still looks beautiful on a tablet. And so this is important because a lot of people, at least for me, like when I first designed my portfolio, I made it fit to my own personal laptop. And then when I went on it on my phone, I was like, okay, this looks awful. Half of my stuff is missing. So I needed to go back and make sure that my website was responsive.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about portfolio language. This is going to be the accompanying text within your portfolio. This is a really common issue that I hear about when I'm attending webinars or reading about resources of what UX recruiters are looking for. A very common critique is that it's their UX portfolios or UI portfolios, any graphic design portfolios, mostly are a collection of visuals and the accompanying text isn't very strong. So I'm going to talk about some tips for building your portfolio language. Some of these tips are also relevant for your resume or your LinkedIn descriptions or any other places where you would describe your work. Number one is using active language versus passive language. So that's that's when a subject acts upon a verb. So an example is, instead of "this slide was written by me," I wrote this slide. So leading with the subject or leading with yourself and the action that you performed to produce something rather than starting with the item that you produced. It just creates like a more compelling narrative when you're using active language, and it comes across sounding a lot stronger. Proofreading is an obvious one, but it's really surprising how when you proofread you can proofread your own work like 5 times. And I'm sure everyone can relate to this. You'll still have someone else proofread and they'll find something stupid like a typo or a grammatical error that you just missed. So that's definitely really important as well for your portfolio language, to proofread it yourself and then get some other people to proofread it. Use your writing to tell a story of why. So even if your portfolio is mostly a collection of visuals, say your portfolio is focused on graphic design, logo design, or UI design, most of your deliverables are going to be visual elements. What you can do though is use your writing to describe why you made the decisions that you made, even it can be down to even like why you decided to go with the colors that you went with, why you decided to go with the font. So you can add a lot of description to your portfolio that can give a recruiter or someone who's interested in your work more of insight into what your work process is. And as you're telling a story, you also want to be concise in presenting your process. So you want it to be clear why you're giving this information rather than like a rambling story. Keep it concise and keep it focused on the process. You can still personalize your writing. So this is another feedback that I've heard before, is that you don't have to write it like a formal research report. You can still write it with your personal like writer's tone. Establish a hierarchy of language and formatting. So establishing how you are going to format what your headers, and if you're going to have font changes, establishing whether you want your headers to be full-length sentences or 3-word descriptions, using bold, italics, text size strategically. So it should make sense how you're using differences in your text, and it shouldn't just be kind of thrown out there. So if you're usually using italics for one purpose, for example, if you're using italics to emphasize, or if you're using italics for quotes, or if you're using italics as kind of like side notes, maintain that consistency throughout your portfolio. And lastly, aside from just proofreading for typos and grammatical errors, you also want to get feedback on it on a high level. And generally, it's a good idea to get feedback from a peer, a professional if you can, but also someone who doesn't work in UX, and try and get an idea of whether they can still understand what you're describing, because you don't want your portfolio language to be so full of jargon that it's not understandable, because sometimes people hiring for UX positions, especially like in freelance, they don't actually work in UX. So they still need to be understanding what you're talking about without knowing all of the definitions in UX work. So next I'll look at some examples. So this is kind of an example of using passive language versus active language again. So usability testing resulted in finding many opportunities for design flows to become smoother. So I tried to kind of make a sentence that doesn't sound that great. First of all, the tense is kind of confusing there, and it doesn't sound very strong. It doesn't really show what you were doing. And another way to word that would be, my team and I conducted usability testing with 5 participants. So you're adding a little bit more detail, and you're also making it more actionable. We discovered inconsistencies in our design flow that informed our future iterations. So making it sound a little bit more professional, and also a little bit more descriptive of why would I care about that sentence? What was the usability testing for? And it was to discover something that could help you design the next iteration better. And I've got some examples here of portfolios kind of on both ends of the spectrum as far as how much text to include. Specifically, I was looking through some portfolio reviews of some lead UX designers, and they're going through portfolios and giving feedback. The one on the right, the red portfolio, the feedback given for this one was that there's great visuals and it looks beautiful, but there's very little text. There's only really a little introduction on the top slide. And so none of that really like tells anything. Like, you could pull those images from anywhere, and it doesn't really tell a recruiter why you made any of the decisions that you made or how you accomplished anything. So it's not very informative of your actual process. The left side is a bit more text heavy, and arguably too text heavy, especially in the top part of it. So kind of trying to find a balance between those is important, maybe like alternating text and images. I'll also have some resources that I'm sharing at the end that I have some examples of professionals talking about what they're looking for, so that you can see where my references are coming from. So I'll share that at the end. Next, I'm going to talk about portfolio user flows. On the next slide, please. So Erin already talked a little bit about user flows. I'm going to talk about specifically how it would relate to building your portfolio. So to kind of reiterate, a user flow is a tool for visually representing the user's movements through a product step by step. User flows help to visualize how your user will navigate through and interact with your website. So the example flow right here, this is more for a client-facing website rather than a portfolio. I'll have an example of a portfolio user flow in a second. But questions that you might want to ask yourself, or why a user flow in your portfolio might be relevant, is you want to wonder, does one screen flow into the next? So going from clicking links on your page, does it make sense? Is the navigation between the sections of your portfolio intuitive? Can people find what they're looking for? Does the pattern of information make sense? Does the website leave room for user error? For example, a back button. One peeve of mine that is really annoying on a lot of websites is when you accidentally click something, you're trying to go back, and then it just gives you an error and you can't get back to wherever you were, and then you have to restart all over. Does the website lead to an action item? So you want, at the end of your case study or at the end of your entire portfolio, you do want there to be an action item, because ultimately why you're creating a portfolio to get some kind of recognition from a recruiter or a peer or someone who's going to be interested in your work. So on the next slide, I'm going to talk about portfolio structure. So some tips for portfolio structure is to create a story even throughout your entire portfolio and through each case study. This was a very, very simplistic example of a user flow of a portfolio. So someone lands upon your page and you'll usually have a welcome and your name needs to be on the front. I've actually gone through some portfolios where I can't find the portfolio owner's name. So that's like one important tip, is to make sure that your name is like right up there so they know who they're looking at, because recruiters are probably looking at tons of these a day. Next, the person who's navigating will click a section. So for this specifically, I'm going to the project section, and then they can pick which project they want to choose. And then once they click, say, project 1, you'll want to consider what happens at the end of that project. Are they able to click next to go see another project? Are they able to click back to go back to your main page? Or are they able to get more information? For example, you might have some more reports or more details or a video to accompany it that you might want to take them to. Some other tips are using consistent text and visual themes to maintain a structure. Consider your spacing. So we're not limited to a paper here like it would be if you were printing out your portfolio. So there's no need to cram your information into too tight of a place, but you do want to kind of consider what it's going to look like when you're scrolling through it and how it's going to fit on somebody's computer screen. And another important tip is to make sure that there's a navigation bar or a menu that's easy to see and easy to use, where the buttons actually go where they're supposed to go, and so that someone can easily go to your resume or go to your projects or your about section. And then prioritize your best portfolio piece. So you want to have that one highlighted. Some people will want to use their most recent one first, but it's actually a better practice to have your best portfolio piece first, because a lot of people who go through your portfolio are probably not going to go through all of your projects. And on the next slide, I'll just talk a little bit about how to set up navigation within your portfolio. So as far as the front menu, I have some examples on the bottom here. There's different ways, there's different sections that you can include in your portfolio depending on kind of your disciplines and how much you want to share. Generally, you always want an about section, an about me section that's going to be not necessarily a background on your career experience, but that can be like where you personalize it and talk about yourself and your hobbies as well. And then you can talk a little bit about your specific focus in UX, UI, or design, or whatever field you might be in. And then next, projects, or you can label it cases, you can label it work, you can label it design. There's different ways to label that. But some section that's going to show your case studies. Resume is another one that you can have as a main link. Not all of these people have it as their main link, but it is one that I've seen is recommended if you are actively looking for UX opportunities, because you want a recruiter to be able to easily get to your resume. A contact me section with some information. You can include like a calendar invite there. You can include your email there and other. So if you also do photography, art, or you want to have a separate section for your academic work, that's another place where you can showcase other compelling work that you've done, or not necessarily just work, but even just your hobbies as well. And so that's the overall portfolio navigation. And then as far as case studies, what to include, you want to start with an overview. that describes the purpose of the project. So why were you doing this project? Was it a school project? Was it a hackathon? Was it a client project? You want to describe your role. You couldn't be the only one working on this project. You can also include other team members if you'd like. That's kind of a common practice, especially if the team members you worked with are UX professionals as well. You can include their names and their roles. A general information about your approach. You can include design tools that you used and an objective. And the objective is what is your end goal with this project? And the purpose here is to kind of get someone interested in reading your case study and give them a high level overview of it. Another section you might want is some research and discovery. So you may not have done much research for the project. If it's like a graphic design or UI design, maybe you didn't have to do user research necessarily, but you do want to include some kind of explanation of what you did to prepare and what methodologies that you were going to use, secondary research that you've done. The next section would be ideation. So how you put together your ideas, how you put together your initial concepts, brainstorming sessions, personas, user journeys can be included in this section. Design. Here you can go from the wireframe to the final design and include iterations of it as well, the low fidelity, the high fidelity design, and then a conclusion. And this is another part that I've heard is often missing in portfolios is a strong conclusion. So you should describe what impact your work had. And like what Erin was saying, maybe a lot of us as students, we don't actually get to have our case studies lead to an actual change in a company because we don't have the opportunity. But an impact can be what you learned, what your final product, how you shared your final product, for example, if you just shared it with peers and it was helpful for them, if you worked on a team, what the impact of working on that team was, and limitations as well. So this is a good point to acknowledge anything that you would have liked to include had it been a more, had it been in a different setting, had you had more time. For example, if it's a hackathon, maybe you don't have very much time. So that's a good time to point out what you would have done if you had more opportunities there. So next we'll be talking about some options for designing your website.
Yeah, there are many options to design your website, so let's take a look at some. First, we'll cover Behance, the benefits of which include a simple interface as well as its degree of customization, which allows you to create extensive case studies for various topics. One of the complaints users have, though, is that it can be a hassle to compress and change file sizes. Second is Dribbble. One of the pros is the big and inspiring community. Also, there are many useful networking opportunities. In Dribbble, you can even bounce some ideas off of each other for feedback. One of the drawbacks is that with all the content and ads, it can be distracting, and the upload size is also limited to 10 megabytes. Third, we look at Squarespace. It has many templates as well as an all-in-one platform with widgets, plugins, extensions, etc. However, it can be relatively expensive. It doesn't have support for third-party apps and plugins either, but that's because it has its own, which are already pretty good. Next up is UXfolio. It offers a lot of helpful diagrams and flows, as well as suggestions for your case study sections, but it's not as customizable, and people usually they tend to report that it's hard to resize images in files sometimes. Then we have Wix. It has a free plan as well as other low-cost plans, and with that you get a lot of templates and intuitive UI and live edits. Some drawbacks include that the Wix branding in the free plan is really prevalent, and there's also an apparent lack of deep analytics. Last but not least is WordPress. Its benefits include the wide variety of themes, excellent SEO features, and its affordability in terms of its free and low-cost plans. One thing to be aware of is that the need for development may arise, This isn't necessarily bad at all. And if you're comfortable writing code, that's awesome, and you can totally go for it. If you're not, then maybe consider other options. So considering the important aspects of a portfolio we covered earlier, we'll take a brief look at what makes an example case study by Simon Pan called Uber Magic 2.0 great. For the first point, it starts off by defining the project's background, challenges, and even his role. In this case, the goal was to improve the Uber app by making it more efficient, accurate, and engaging for users. This part is important because it provides the reader with the context to understand the impact it made. The second point, Simon shares the insight he gained from conducting user research and interviews to help empathize with the users. This really helps the audience understand the problems that the users typically go through. Third, he also offers a glimpse at his sketches, user flows, wireframes, all of which really offer some light onto his thought process and his overall approach. Finally, Simon shows the improvements in the final product and the impact it made. In your own portfolios, you can even include a reflection of lessons you learned, and this can go quite a long way in showing readers that you're always staying curious.
Does anyone have any questions about anything that we've presented? Comments?
I want to thank you guys. I am a grad student in the research and experimental program, and we don't really talk about how to do a portfolio or any of that. That's like not on our side of things. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to share a resource that has a lot of, goes kind of in depth on what we talked about, and it has some different focuses as well. So I'm gonna share this right now. Let me know if there's any problems opening that link. It has some reference portfolios to look at, and it also has resources for specific disciplines. For example, if you're doing UX research, there's some specific resources for that. Resources for game design, UX writing and strategy, and also some ideas for how you can get a portfolio started if you don't have any client work. So how to build personal projects, where to find projects, or even how to turn academic work into a UX portfolio case study.
Katie, you mentioned that you had some example portfolios that you wanted to show. Did you guys want to take over to share screen?
Yeah, since we've got a little bit of extra time, I'll go ahead and share my portfolio so that you guys can see an example of a student portfolio. It's not perfect. It's probably never going to be perfect. I always want to improve on it, but this will just kind of give you an idea, and I think it can be helpful for anyone who is interested in building a portfolio without client work, because all of my case studies right now are school related. Let's see.
Quickly to interrupt you, Katie, we have a question in chat that says, what are case studies? Are they like personal projects?
So a case study is, basically going to be the compilation of the work that you did, and it can be personal, it can be academic, or it can be client work. And case study is going to include all of those steps like in the process. I can show you how I put together a case study that's more personal right now through my portfolio. Are you guys able to see it? Yeah, okay. So I'll kind of answer that question as I'm going through. So one case study that I have is actually through Braven. If you guys know Braven, I did the capstone project, And I used the work that I did to, sorry, my internet is like gonna be really slow. You guys are gonna have to see how painful this is. I used the work that I did in the capstone project to present it as a UX case study. So you can kind of see the elements that I'm talking about where I sectioned it off. So I started with the context and why we were doing this project. And I labeled this section as empathize. It's kind of like the discovery portion. And I have interviews and the key findings of our interviews. So you'll notice that for each section, each deliverable that I'm providing, I'm also providing a description of the impact and takeaways of that. So this entire piece here is a case study, and a case study really just kind of means putting it together into the process, the design, and the impact of it. So here's the ideate section. We did a brainstorming session. We created our prototypes. We tested them, and then here are the results. We pitched it to the teams. If you've ever done the Braven capstone, you present it, at least back when we were on campus, you would present it to your class of like a state, like 5 judges, I think. And then we actually moved on to present it to the entire like Braven community. It was like 200 people. And we, here's just some pictures. And that allowed me to show like a direct impact in a future direction of what we were hoping to do. And so, yeah, so this just kind of shows how I turned like an academic project into a UX case study by including the deliverables, including the process. One other that I'll show, for anyone who is in psychology, this was a heuristic evaluation that I did through my human factors class that I turned into a case study. And I've actually presented this one in a job interview before, so I think it's a pretty strong study. So I explained the context, and then I went into describing the users that I was evaluating for. So a heuristic evaluation is evaluating a product based on like user interface principles and UX design principles. And for us, it was a lot of psychological principles. So I first talked about the actual users. I included some visuals here and some methodologies. It's called affinity mapping. I described the users and their use context. My portfolio might be, I want to say this case especially is probably very text heavy, like more so than it should be. That's one thing I need to improve on, is adding more visuals. And since I was turning like a written project into a case study, that's kind of part of why it's very text heavy. I talked about the methods that I used, and then I gave like an overall description of the violations that I found in the user interface and accessibility and the overall user experience of the product that I was evaluating. And then again, describe some results here and the impact and some takeaways. And I always like to describe any future work that I might do with this project. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit of an idea of what like case studies in action can look like and how you can turn student work into a portfolio. Does anyone have any questions on that? I'm gonna stop sharing now.
Yeah,
Yeah, of
Sarah
course.
commented that her Braven experience was only through COVID, so it's only virtual presentations. So not like how you
Yeah.
experienced it, Katie.
Yeah, I know that is kind of unfortunate. It was pretty fun in person. We went to we actually had like a whole like big banquet where we got like served dinner and everything where we presented. It was super cool. It sucks that some of the people missed out on those opportunities.
Yeah, hopefully Sarah and the rest of her peers can, somehow incorporate this experience soon, seeing how everything goes within the next semester and continue using that knowledge that you learn in Braven.
Definitely, yeah. And I'll just link my portfolio as well if anyone found that useful for some examples. But I think that's pretty much all that we had planned to cover. Unless there's any other comments or questions or anything like that.
One thing I'd like to suggest is if you guys are working on your portfolios and want some feedback, you can send it in our Discord, and I'd love to look at them, and I'm sure other people would too, and we can just give each other some feedback. If that's something you're interested in, let me know.
Yeah, Erin, would you want to repost the link tree in your Discord and the Notion page in the chat, just in case some people missed it?
Sure. Actually, Katie, can you do that? Because you have the Notion link.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, I have it too.
So Anna asked, how do we know what exactly to put in the case studies? Is there a specific format?
There's like general templates. Actually, I'm gonna pull up a resource that I use right now to give you some ideas. But overall, like the main points that you want to get across is like an overview of the context of what you're doing and why you're doing it. The actual design process or the actual work process would be like the meat of it. And then lastly would be a conclusion and an impact. Let me send a resource that I should have though on, here we go. I have a specific resource on UX portfolio case templates. This is in that doc as well, but let me just send it here. And this is something that I've read to help myself get started as well. And it has maybe more ideas of what you can include.
Yeah.
I still, I've always, like when in the beginning when we were getting the UXUI Association started, I was always asking Katie, like, what is a case study? I don't understand, because I'm a graphic design major. And so case studies, we've never really talked about them. But recently I've kind of gathered that a case study includes like the different parts of your process. So for a UX designer, a case study is going to be more like step by step, because there are steps that you need to do when doing a UX project. But for graphic design, like sometimes I just don't have that much to write about, sometimes it's just my assignment was, or my client wanted me to do blah, blah, blah. This is my thought process behind it, and this is what I did. And sometimes that's it. So it doesn't have to be like completely built out, I think, if you're like a graphic designer. I don't know, could be wrong, but that's just my personal experience.
So Sarah is asking, will the slides be posted in Discord as well? So that way, if later she's planning on making a portfolio, she can refer back to it.
Sure.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
And then Anna is asking, is there a class that teaches UX design at SJSU? For me personally, I'm getting an advertising minor, so I've taken the UXUI class under the advertising department. But I'm pretty sure that Erin or Katie knows more classes than I do. So do you guys have any more suggestions on what to take?
There's an interaction design minor, but yeah, interaction design minor. But I don't really know. I haven't taken any and I probably won't by the time I graduate. And that's kind of why we started this club, is for people to learn about it. But I've also learned on my own on Coursera. So
Yeah, the only class I've taken that would be related to UX was human factors in psychology, and I'm not sure if that's like a psychology specific class. It's Psych 173, and it's probably psychology specific. And yeah, I have heard about the interaction design minor, and I know that one of our actual faculty advisors actually started this minor. I'm looking at it right now. I'm going to share it, the program, if anyone's interested. There are some design classes. There's an interaction design. The human factors is included in there. There's some more like routes you can go that's more like computer science as far as like programming. And then there's more like you can go on the psychological side. Yeah, that again, that's kind of why we started this club. Is it's hard to learn this in a classroom format. A lot of schools aren't offering it. A lot of schools, like, they'll have something like, there's the graduate program at San Jose State is human factors and ergonomics, and a lot of the students in that program are UX designers or UX researchers. But it's hard to get access to classes specific for UX design or UI design on a undergraduate level. Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about the Google UX design certificate, also on Coursera. There are like a lot of resources out there that you can find to self-teach. And then there's also classes and boot camps that you can take as well.
Yeah, so I just dropped the class name that I took, Advertising 132 with Professor John De La Cruz. So like if you want to get into advertising as well, that's another route to explore UX UI in. And then Hergina said, oh, so are you in industrial design studies? That's pretty cool. Okay. Oh, you're a grad student. Okay, that's awesome.
I'm going to send a link to the Google UX design certificate. Oh, also, if you have, there's also LinkedIn Learning classes as well, that I've also seen some of my friends do. They're kind of like on a, I think that they're more general, but it's really good to like get started is what I've heard. I don't know if they have like super specific courses on it. I will say what I've heard from a lot of people who get into the field is that a lot of their work is kind of self-taught until they start actually working. But that's not to say just because your classes aren't necessarily like directly UX classes, that's not to say that they're not like valuable to learning more about UX or I'm sure UI for like the design program. Because I know that a lot of my psychology classes, like I've been able to apply like cognitive psychology to learning a little bit more about UX. So I feel like one of the great things about UX is you don't have to have a degree in it specifically or courses in it specifically, but it takes from a lot of different disciplines. So a lot of what you're learning is probably going to be valuable to how you can approach the discipline, the field.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like how you can apply your own major psychology into like a whole other discipline, you know, where it involves like design studies and like how something needs to be not only aesthetically pleasing, but also it has to consider function as well.
Yeah, and I will also, the UXUI Association is made up of people from like all different, like even in the officers, we have like almost everyone is like a different major. There's like a lot of variation in what gets people into UX. So it's pretty cool.
So Anna's asking, how can we smoothly transition into UX design if our major is not related to UX?
If you don't mind, I'm curious what your major would be, or what your major is. And if you look at the Notion document that I send, or if you get a chance to look at that, I do have one section. It's for portfolio specific, but you can kind of, oh yeah, business major. Okay, you can kind of go from the portfolio work, and kind of it gives you an idea of how to build up transitioning into UX design from non-UX. So a lot of people recommend doing like volunteer or classwork to build up your portfolio. And as you build a portfolio, it kind of like builds up your reputation to be able to get like an internship or be able to collaborate. But a business major, I feel like that definitely has a lot of applications. I know like business, I think there's like different disciplines in it, but like on a business like marketing side, or like a understanding like B2B and B2C, like what people are looking for, what sells, and like how to get into like a user or a customer. You can kind of go from like customer to looking at it as a user, and apply a lot of what you've learned there. But I only took like a few business classes, so I don't know. I'm maybe not the best resource on that, but just from what I've like read about people who have transitioned, I've definitely seen people go from business to UX. So yeah, if you get a chance, I would recommend checking out the portfolio resources without client work, and they talk about like a lot of different ways to kind of transition.
Alrighty, guys, any other questions? So Sarah has the same concern, but she's coming from software engineering, and she says that doesn't feel like that she's not that good with coding or advanced coding in general.
I actually have a really specific kind of example for that. I'm always talking about this community. There's a community called Design Buddies, and I like kind of fangirl for the girl who started it. She's like a graduate student in software engineering, I believe, right now, and her focus was software engineering, but she ended up tailoring that to UX. She ended up like combining like art, and realized that she doesn't really like coding and that kind of that aspect, and kind of changed her trajectory. So if you want to check out her work, I feel like that I'm linking her portfolio right now. I feel like that could help. And I actually have, I think, like a specific event that I saw that was talking specifically about how you can go from engineering to UX. So I'll try and find that real quick and post that up as well. One second, let's see. Oh, here we go. Okay, there's an event. It's called UX/engineering collaboration, and I believe I didn't actually attend this one, but I saw it talked about how you can collaborate and between UX and engineering, and how that can, like, having experience in one or the other can kind of inform like working together on a team. Nice.
Looks like Sarah's winning with a lot of resources today, and that's totally awesome that we provide you this opportunity, Sarah, to get all the resources that you're looking for. Anyone else have any other questions before we get going? Because I know everybody has homework and dinner and, you know, prepping for finals.
Ugh.
Paul says thank you.
Yeah, thank you,
Right.
everyone.
All right, bye everybody. Thank you for coming.
All right, bye guys. Thank you for coming.